When a woman chooses silence, the world begins to listen. Her peace becomes precious. Her absence becomes thunder. She does not chase, she becomes. He returns, not to a woman who waited, but to one who rose, not for love lost, but for the light he forgot how to hold. Silence is a sanctuary. It is not the absence of sound, but the sacred space where a woman rediscovers her soul. In a world constantly pulling, pushing, and demanding explanation, silence becomes not a retreat, but a return to the core, a return to dignity, a return to truth. When a woman chooses silence, it is not because she has nothing to say. It is because everything she could say has already been felt, known, and written deep into the pages of her life. Silence holds power that noise will never understand. It is in silence that the storm within settles, the dust clears, and the voice of intuition grows louder than fear. A woman who rests in silence does not shrink. She strengthens. She no longer needs to plead, to be seen, to be heard, to be chosen. She understands now that the one who sees her soul will never need convincing. The one who knows her worth will not require a second word. There is a rhythm to silence, a grace. It teaches a woman that her presence does not need permission to be powerful. It teaches her that she is not measured by the echoes of her explanations, but by the depth of her stillness. In silence, she learns to separate what is meant to stay from what must be released. She lets go, not in bitterness, but in clarity, and clarity is a gift that noise cannot give. When a woman is silent after pain, she is not weak, she is wise. She understands that words can heal, but silence can transform. Words may argue, but silence declares. Words may beg, but silence teaches. It is in this space, when she walks away, not in anger, but in understanding, that the world around her shifts. What once overlooked her now longs for her presence. What once took her for granted now misses her light. There is mystery in silence. It causes reflection. It awakens curiosity. It unsettles those who expected drama, confusion, or chaos. Instead, she gave them stillness, peace, and her back turned with elegance. There is a kind of poetry in a woman who no longer chases. She sits, she prays, she breathes, she rebuilds, and all of it in the quiet sanctuary of her own becoming. Silence becomes the armor she wears, the home she returns to, not because she fears confrontation, but because she knows not every battle deserves her fire. She chooses her energy with care. She understands that her healing does not require an audience. Her growth does not beg for applause. She has learned that the most sacred parts of herself deserve peace, not performance. Silence teaches her boundaries. She no longer entertains explanations that drain her or apologies that arrive too late. She no longer needs to prove what her soul already knows. She no longer sacrifices her serenity for temporary validation. She stands in her truth, not to be understood, but to be whole. And in that wholeness, everything else falls into place. People return when silence speaks louder than words ever could. They remember her strength, not in her shouting, but in her choosing not to speak. They feel the absence of her warmth, the void of her energy. And while they wonder what changed, she is already moving in a different rhythm, one composed in silence, guided by grace. Silence is not passive. It is purposeful. It is not empty. It is full of decisions, of growth, of self-love. A woman in silence is not lost. She is locating herself. She is shedding expectations, illusions, and narratives that no longer serve her. She is planting new roots in soil she has tilled with tears and courage. And those roots, silent as they are, run deep. Silence becomes her revolution, her liberation, her crown. It holds the words she didn't say, the battles she didn't fight, the doors she closed gently but firmly. It holds the wisdom that says, I do not need to scream to be heard. I do not need to stay to be remembered. I do not need to explain my healing to anyone. And so she walks forward, without fanfare, without announcements, just the soft rhythm of her feet moving in a direction called peace. And the world may not understand it, but that's the beauty of silence. It wasn't meant for them. It was meant for her, a sanctuary for the soul that chose to rise without a sound. Absence reveals value, not because you planned it that way, not because you wanted to be missed, but because the space you leave behind becomes a mirror that reflects your worth to those who once overlooked it. When a woman removes her presence, when she withdraws her energy, her light, her laughter, her time, suddenly the world begins to notice the warmth that once lived in her nearness. Absence is not a punishment. It is a revelation. It shows who valued your presence and who simply got used to it. When you are always available, always answering, always giving, always present, your presence becomes expected. Routine. And in the eyes of some, routine loses shine. But when you step away, when your name is no longer the first on their screen, when your voice is no longer daily music in their world, something shifts. People begin to feel the outline of your absence like a shape pressed into memory. They remember the comfort you carried, the strength you offered, the beauty of your being simply by noticing it is no longer there. The heart learns through contrast. It realizes the richness of water only after thirst. It understands the weight of love only after the room echoes with silence. When a woman walks away without anger, without resentment, without a single word raised in bitterness, her absence becomes a louder truth than any argument ever could. Because people don't remember how loud you yelled. They remember how quiet it got when you left. There is a holy kind of grace in letting your absence speak. You don't call to explain. You don't beg for understanding. You simply step out of the places where you were poured empty. You leave behind your silence like a song that lingers in the background. And over time, they start to hear it, they feel it, and it begins to dawn on them what your presence really meant. It is human nature to take consistency for granted. People believe the sun will rise every morning, not because they command it, but because it always has. And that is how many treat a woman's love, her patience, her showing up. Until the morning comes and the sky is quiet and there is no sun, only the memory of light that used to fill the room. Absence makes the heart not just grow fonder, it makes the mind clearer. It gives others space to feel what they didn't acknowledge when you were there. They may have seen you as convenient, as predictable, as always around. But in your absence, they see something else, the reality of what they lost. And sometimes it is only through that ache, that vacancy, that they understand who you truly were. But more importantly, absence reveals value to the woman herself. When you step back, you see who comes forward. When you stop reaching, you see who starts. And sometimes the absence doesn't just reveal your value to others, it reveals the truth about others to you. You begin to see clearly who only stayed close because you were doing the emotional labor, who only checked in when you checked first, who only appreciated you in theory, not in action. Your absence allows clarity to rise like morning fog lifting from a valley. You begin to understand that you were never too much. You were just too giving in a world that didn't know how to pour back. You realize that the ones who truly value you will notice your absence and not wait too long before honoring your presence. You become sacred to yourself again. You become mystery, not because you are hiding, but because you have chosen to protect your energy. You are no longer in every room, at every call, in every message thread. You are intentional now. Present where you are celebrated, not just tolerated. Available where there is mutual respect, not emotional depletion. And those who truly saw your worth will come to feel that absence as a kind of ache. The kind that whispers at night, "She brought peace I didn't understand." The kind that lingers in moments of stillness when they realize they didn't just lose a person, they lost a presence. They lost a light. That is the quiet power of absence. It speaks when words no longer serve. It teaches without preaching. It stands still while the world runs in circles. And in that stillness, in that silence, your value rises like smoke in a temple, undeniable, holy, and unforgettable. Healing is magnetic. It draws in what is true and repels what is false. It attracts peace, wholeness, and sincerity while pushing away confusion, chaos, and the people who were only drawn to your brokenness. When a woman begins to heal, she becomes a force. Quietly, softly, but undeniably, she changes the rhythm of every room she enters. Her presence begins to hum with a different frequency, not loud, not boastful, but steady, powerful, and rooted. Healing doesn't demand attention. It simply is. And those with eyes to see and hearts to feel are drawn to it without understanding why. There is something luminous about a woman who has walked through fire and chosen not to carry its ashes. You see it in her eyes, clear, calm, unafraid. You feel it in her words, measured, kind, with no need to prove or plead. Healing doesn't erase the past, but it reframes it. It turns wounds into wisdom, scars into stories, and sorrow into strength. A healed woman no longer explains the pain she survived. She wears her peace like a crown made of quiet victories. What draws people to her is not perfection, it is presence. A presence unclouded by bitterness, unburdened by old battles. She doesn't need to convince anyone of her worth because she knows it in her bones. She no longer hustles for validation. Her value isn't up for discussion. That kind of certainty radiates. It whispers to the insecure, "You may rise too." It challenges the broken to heal themselves or else be left behind. Because when you heal, your spirit starts rejecting what once felt familiar. You no longer fit in the rooms where survival was the only language. Healing changes your energy. It realigns your steps, sharpens your vision. You begin to attract people and opportunities that resonate with the healthier version of you. Conversations deepen, connections grow roots. You no longer find comfort in chaos, and so chaos finds it harder to reach you. People who once depended on your pain to feel needed begin to fade. And though it may hurt, you understand it is not rejection, it is refinement. When a woman heals, she stops choosing from her wounds. She no longer seeks people to complete her, fix her, or fill the holes left by others. She becomes whole unto herself. She learns to give without losing, to love without begging, and to walk away without fear. And in doing so, she draws in a different kind of love, one that doesn't ask her to shrink, one that meets her in her light. Healing also exposes. It shows you who can grow with you and who cannot. Some are drawn to your brokenness because they can control it, manipulate it, or feel superior beside it. But healing burns that dynamic to the ground. When you rise, not everyone will clap. Some will shrink away, confused by your peace, intimidated by your growth. Let them go, because your healing was never about keeping others comfortable. It was about setting yourself free. A healed woman understands boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred ground. She knows what she will and won't allow. She doesn't explain herself to those committed to misunderstanding her. Her time becomes precious, her presence intentional. She walks with a quiet confidence, the kind that can't be faked or fast-tracked. It comes from facing herself, from forgiving herself, from holding her own hand in the dark and saying, "We are going to make it," and meaning it. She no longer needs to be saved. She is her own salvation. And because of that, she becomes a light to others, not because she tries to be, but because healed energy is healing energy. People come near her and feel safer, calmer, more seen. Her joy doesn't scream, it glows. Her peace doesn't push, it invites. Healing is magnetic because it is rare, because it requires courage, because it is a choice, a daily, intentional, sacred choice. It is the work of undoing patterns, breaking cycles, and speaking truth even when your voice shakes. And once you've done it, once you've really done it, the world cannot ignore your shift. The universe meets you at your level. The mirror reflects someone you respect, and your spirit finally rests. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer pretending. You are no longer bleeding for love, sacrificing for attention, or shrinking for approval. You are simply whole. And wholeness, my dear, is the loudest, softest power there is. Stillness speaks. Without a word, it whispers truths too deep for sound. In a world driven by noise, distraction, and urgency, stillness becomes revolutionary. It is in stillness that a woman becomes aware of what she carries and what she must release. It is not just a pause, it is a presence, a sacred, unmoving center from which all wisdom flows. A woman who lives in stillness is not idle. She is listening. She is no longer caught in the frantic cycle of explaining herself, chasing what does not want to be kept, or proving her worth to those who never understood her value. In her stillness, she begins to observe rather than react. She sees people for who they are, not who they pretend to be. She watches energy instead of words. She moves from instinct rather than impulse. Stillness is not silence. It is deeper than that. Silence is the absence of sound. Stillness is the presence of peace. It is when a woman becomes a witness to her own life. She stops fighting what she cannot change. She stops forcing what must unfold. She stops talking to be heard and instead lets her energy, her posture, her decisions do the speaking for her. And in doing so, her presence begins to carry a kind of language no noise can replicate. There is a kind of strength in stillness that many cannot understand. It is easier to act out of anxiety, to speak out of discomfort, to react out of pain. But the woman who can remain still, who can breathe, observe, and trust the moment, is not passive. She is powerful. She does not flinch when abandoned, does not chase when dismissed. She stays rooted in her truth, knowing that anything that truly belongs to her will recognize her energy without needing to be begged. Stillness is clarity. When the world quiets, the soul speaks. When the drama fades, the truth rises. She begins to hear her own intuition again, the voice that got drowned beneath the noise of opinions, expectations, and disappointments. And when she hears it, she begins to follow it. Not blindly, but boldly, no longer second-guessing herself, no longer questioning whether she is too much or not enough. She knows, she feels, and so she moves when it is time with precision. The woman who learns to dwell in stillness becomes a mystery. She does not show all her cards, does not spill her soul to prove her sincerity. She has learned that her stillness can speak louder than her defense. Her lack of reaction becomes her response. She no longer reacts to bait or dances with chaos. Her non-response becomes her boundary. And those who once fed on her emotional labor now find themselves grasping at the air she left behind. Stillness teaches discernment. In that sacred pause, she sees not only who others are, but who she is becoming. She watches her own triggers rise and fall, and she learns to master them rather than be mastered by them. She doesn't suppress her feelings. She observes them. She doesn't deny her pain. She honors it without letting it lead. In stillness, she understands that healing is not about constant motion, but about sacred rest, about letting the soul catch up with the body. Stillness is also grace. It is the space between what was and what will be. It is where she forgives without forgetting who she is, where she lets go not to lose but to grow. She does not rush her transformation. She respects its pace. She trusts that what is meant for her is already moving toward her, and so she stays still, not because she's waiting, but because she's aligned. People notice when a woman becomes still, not quiet in defeat, but quiet in divinity. She is no longer interested in proving her story, defending her boundaries, or arguing her value. She simply lives it. And that living, that embodiment, begins to speak volumes. They wonder what changed, why her energy feels different, why she no longer entertains what once enticed her. And they may not understand it, but they feel it, because stillness leaves an imprint that lingers long after she has left the room. Stillness speaks of self-trust, of inner knowing, of divine timing. It teaches her that she is not forgotten, not behind, not less than. She is simply in her becoming, and that becoming does not need to shout. It only needs to be honored. So she rests, she listens, she moves only when moved by truth. And in that stillness, her soul sings a song no chaos can silence. Growth makes noise in silence. It doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures or loud proclamations. It doesn't come with a spotlight or a stage. Real growth happens quietly, often in the still aching hours when no one is watching, when the world thinks you're doing nothing at all. But in that quiet, something sacred is unfolding. A woman sheds old skin, breaks silent patterns, and learns to sit with herself, not to suffer, but to see. To truly see who she is becoming. There is a noise to that kind of becoming, but it is not heard with the ears. It is felt in the spirit. It's the shifting of beliefs, the dismantling of lies she once told herself just to feel safe. It's the cracking of illusions, the trembling of fears being replaced by courage. In the stillness, she confronts the truths she used to run from. She listens to the voice that used to whisper in doubt, but now rises in certainty. No, it's not a loud noise, but it shakes her soul in a way that transforms everything. Growth in silence is often misunderstood. People think you've disappeared, grown cold, or lost your way. They don't realize that you are deep in the sacred work of healing, stretching, and rebuilding. They see the pause in your engagement and think it's weakness, but what they don't hear is the roaring within, the conversations with your younger self, the setting down of generational burdens, the quiet bravery of choosing peace over performance. It takes strength to grow in silence, to not prove your progress, to not parade your transformation, to not explain to others what you're doing with your spirit. It takes wisdom to know that some things bloom best in private. Roots grow underground. Muscles strengthen in stillness. A tree doesn't shout as it grows taller, it simply reaches. A flower doesn't beg to be seen, it simply opens. In your silent growth, there is also grief. You grieve the version of you who didn't know better. You grieve the places where you made yourself small, where you begged instead of believed. You sit in the stillness and hold those memories, not with shame, but with softness, because you know now every painful step carried you here. And here is not final, but it is sacred. The woman who grows in silence becomes unshakable. She learns to honor the process even when it's lonely. She stops seeking applause and starts seeking alignment. She no longer rushes healing because she understands that real transformation isn't about speed, it's about depth. She would rather go slow and be whole than move fast and stay broken. In this kind of growth, boundaries become clearer. She learns to say no without guilt, to love without losing herself, to walk away without apology. She no longer fits into places that celebrate her weakness. Her silence becomes a sanctuary, not a sentence. In that quiet, she starts building a life that doesn't need validation to feel valuable. People will feel it even if they don't hear it. They will sense the shift in her. They will notice her peace and wonder where it came from. They will hear the echo of her absence and not understand why her presence once felt so powerful. What they don't know is that while they waited for a dramatic return, she was busy becoming a woman who no longer needs to return at all. She outgrew the version of herself that stayed where she was not seen. The beauty of silent growth is that it cannot be manipulated. It is not shaped by opinion or praise. It is yours alone, deep, sacred, and honest. You are not performing. You are not pretending. You are evolving. You are healing not for show, but for substance. And in doing so, your life begins to hum with a quiet power that no one can take from you. So let them misunderstand. Let them think you've gone still. Let them believe you've stepped back. You know the truth. Inside that silence, you are moving mountains. Inside that stillness, your soul is singing. Every breath is a step. Every decision is a seed. Every quiet day is a deeper rooting. And that, dear one, is the noise of growth, a sacred sound only the soul can hear. Energy doesn't beg. It doesn't chase, convince, or plead. It simply is. It moves with quiet certainty, grounded in truth and aligned with worth. When a woman truly knows her value, her energy speaks before she does. It walks into the room, calm and unbothered, not because she is arrogant, but because she finally understands she doesn't have to perform for love, prove her worth, or fight for space. Her energy becomes a reflection of her inner clarity. She no longer needs to ask for what should already recognize her. There is a shift that happens when a woman stops begging and starts believing in herself, in her wholeness, in her sacred presence. She doesn't force conversations. She doesn't reach out just to be acknowledged. She doesn't compromise her peace to feel wanted. Her energy speaks a language that says, if it's not mutual, it's not for me. That kind of presence is powerful, not loud, not boastful, just solid, steady, and self-assured. She remembers the days she begged, not always with words, but with effort. The over-explaining, the over-giving, the trying to be chosen by people who weren't even clear about themselves. She remembers bending over backward, holding space for others while no one held space for her. She remembers what it felt like to confuse attention for affection, to stay where she was only tolerated because she hadn't yet learned how to stand alone. But growth changed that. Healing changed that. And now her energy has new standards. A woman whose energy no longer begs is not cold. She is clear. She is no longer interested in games, in hot and cold, in being an option. She knows that real love, real friendship, real opportunity will never ask her to betray herself. So she waits, not in desperation, but in peace, because she knows alignment cannot be forced. What is meant for her will not need to be begged for. It will recognize her, respect her, and remain. When energy stops begging, it starts attracting. Not because it's trying to, but because it has become magnetic in its authenticity. There is something irresistible about someone who knows their worth, who doesn't need external approval to feel whole, who doesn't overstay in places that make them question their value. People may not always understand her distance, her silence, her standards, but they feel her strength. And strength, real strength, draws in what resonates and repels what no longer serves. She now gives from fullness, not fear. She loves without losing herself. She shows up, but she no longer sacrifices her soul in the process. Her yes is intentional. Her no is sacred. And if someone cannot meet her where she stands, she no longer lowers herself to be seen. She lets them go in love, in peace, without bitterness, because she knows when you beg, you bleed. When you stand in your truth, you shine. This kind of energy speaks without speaking. It tells the world, I am whole, I am enough, I am not here to prove that. It creates boundaries without building walls. It allows love in, but it no longer lets confusion linger. She no longer dances for crumbs. She no longer tolerates disrespect in the name of patience. She knows the difference between compromise and self-abandonment, and she chooses herself every time. People may return. They may try to reconnect, to re-enter her space, to reignite what they once ignored. But she doesn't open the door out of nostalgia. She checks the energy. She checks the consistency. She checks the growth. Because her energy is no longer desperate. It's discerning, and that discernment protects her. Not because she's hardened, but because she's healed. Energy doesn't beg because it understands flow. What flows to you freely is for you. What resists, confuses, or drains is not. She moves now with that knowing. She rests in that truth. And in doing so, her presence becomes a filter. The right ones stay. The wrong ones slip away. No chasing, no begging, no convincing, just clarity. She is not waiting to be chosen anymore. She has already chosen herself. Every day, in every moment, with every boundary, with every breath, her energy now mirrors that choice, and that choice has changed everything. Not because it made her perfect, but because it made her powerful, steady, silent, magnetic, whole. Energy like that cannot be ignored. It never begs. It simply arrives and lets everything else reveal itself. A woman who learns to stand in her stillness, to grow in silence, to let her healing speak, to protect her energy, and to know the power of her absence becomes unshakable. She no longer waits to be seen. She sees herself. She no longer begs to be chosen. She chooses herself. Her silence is not weakness, but wisdom. Her absence is not a game, but a lesson. Her healing is not a performance, but a practice. She speaks less, yet says more. She moves slower, yet walks stronger. She does not chase what flees. She becomes what cannot be ignored. And when she does, everything falls into place.